Forest Service, and we are happy to have him here to testify in front of the committee. This is an oversight hearing, President Trump's budget request for the U.S. Forest Service for fiscal year 2026. The chairman has been unavoidably delayed. He'll be here in about 15 minutes. But rather than asking you to delay your time, I would invite you to give your opening statement, and then we'll start with some of the questioning. And when the chairman arrives, he'll make his opening comments. So, welcome to the committee.
Howdy. Thank you, Senator Barrasso, members of the committee. We don't have Ranking Member Heinrich here. Thank you for inviting me to testify today. I want to begin by remembering the tragic loss of the 2 firefighters in Idaho who were ambushed and killed by gunfire on June 29th when they showed up to suppress a fire on Forest Service lands. Our heartfelt condolences go out to Kootenai County and the Coeur d'Alene firefighters, first responders, family members, and the greater Coeur d'Alene community. The Forest Service manages 154 national forests and 20 grasslands, covering 193 million acres in 43 states and Puerto Rico. The Forest Service also works with communities, state, local, and tribal governments, forest industries, and private forest owners managing for multiple uses. The big picture is that America's forests provide timber, clean air and water, forage, and energy production. They support local economies through employment, trade, recreation, tourism, jobs, and livestock grazing. Recent analysis shows that in fiscal year 23, the Forest Service programs contributed approximately 390,000 jobs and $45 billion in gross domestic product. I'm grateful to serve as the 21st Chief of the Forest Service. I recognize I'm the first Chief who did not come from or previously work within the agency, but I hope that you will see that as I do, it's a strength. I have over 27 years of land management experience and fire experience, and I'm a lifelong user of public lands. I've worked for the state agencies in Montana and Idaho. That's given me a perspective on the role of states in managing public trust lands and how that differs from the goals and objectives in managing federal lands. My experience in the private sector with Idaho Forest Group gave me a deep understanding of markets and the role that raw material availability, quality, and price play in being able to support a profitable forest products industry. The fiscal year 26 President's budget refocuses Forest Service efforts on active forest management, critical minerals permitting, recreation, and energy development. Basically, multiple use management, a back-to-basics approach. In addition, the budget request emphasizes efficient and effective fire management by consolidating the federal suppression response apparatus into the new U.S. Wildland Fire Service under the Department of Interior. The Forest Service was founded on and understands the utility of our national forests. The production of timber, lumber, paper, bioenergy, and other wood products is vital for the country's well-being. The President's Executive Order 14225, expansion of timber production, emphasizes the importance of timber production and how forest management can support American lives and communities. The fiscal year 26 budget request supports this executive order by maintaining our ability to support the forest products industry and shifting the forest inventory analysis program to the National Forest System. This shift will better align the practical data needs for both public and private forest management. Livestock grazing on federal lands is integral to ranchers across the United States, especially in the West. Grazing is permitted on nearly 40% of the 193 million acres of National Forest System lands across 27 states. We administer permits for approximately 5,500 permittees, with 1.3 million acres authorized for cattle and another 800,000 AMs for sheep. Access to critical minerals is essential to contribute to a stable supply of energy for current and future generations while continuing to sustain long-term ecosystem health and productivity. National forests are a bountiful resource for minerals, and we work hard along with the BLM to manage leasable minerals from the National Forest System. We carry a fiduciary responsibility to the American public. We must steward tax dollars wisely, so we are examining how to best optimize our workforce and our expenditures to ensure that we are focused on field-based operations that are essential to meeting high-priority objectives. To this point, the 26 budget request reduces or eliminates some aspects of federal funding from the Forest Service budget to ensure stewardship of the taxpayer dollars and to better balance the appropriate roles of the federal and the state governments. It is not our intention to degrade the services of states and local governments, but we must change the reliance on the federal government to fund the delivery of these services. In alignment with restoring a federalist approach, we encourage increasing state authority to fund management of state and privately owned forests, community preparedness, and public risk mitigation activities. Communities across the country depend on national forests and grasslands. I will work tirelessly to support those communities by partnering to actively manage the National Forest System for multiple uses. We maintain our commitment to strengthening relationships with industries, ranching families, the mining industry, communities, conservation groups, to deliver on multiple use mission as it has been for more than 100 years. Thank you for inviting me to be here today, and I look forward to your ongoing support, and I'll be glad to answer any of your questions.
Well, thanks so much for your thoughtful testimony, and I want to welcome you here this morning. We really haven't had an opportunity to meet. I've read your bio. I look forward to working with you in the next few years. Congratulations on this important appointment, and incredibly important for Wyoming. And I appreciate your willingness to join us in Wyoming at the Wyoming Stock Growers later this month in Cody, Wyoming. And I'm glad that you'll be meeting with our livestock producers and learning how you can help strengthen the management of our national forest with effective livestock grazing. I also want to congratulate you and thank you for working with Secretary of Agriculture Rollins, your work on rescinding the Roadless rule a few weeks ago. That rule, to me, was outdated. It was outdated policy that has hindered forest management in Wyoming for years. This is going to restore vital forest health. It's going to help reduce wildfire risk across the country and help to boost responsible timber production. So thank you for your leadership there. With regard to timber production, over 2 years ago, the Nyman Enterprise announced layoffs and shift reductions at their Spearfish, South Dakota Forest Products facility. At their facility in Hewlett, Wyoming, they reduced down to one shift. This has significantly reduced their capacity as a result of the Biden administration's limiting of timber production, and this has impacted the sawmills all around. What's the agency doing to retain the remaining forest products infrastructure in the Black Hills National Forest?
Senator, thank you for that question. We've been working very closely with the Nymans and the industry up there to understand the issues and move forward. So there's 3 specific things that we've done. We've identified staff that we've transferred to the Black Hills, actually from Washington State, to help assist in preparing sales. We've increased funding for them in the short term to help address some of the shortfalls in funding that they've had to do more work. The other piece is we're collaborating with not only the industry, but some NGOs in the area, Wild Turkey Federation, Mildred Foundation, and also with the state of Wyoming under the GNA program to increase predictability of the program for the Black Hills. So those are the 3 things we're doing: staffing, funding, and collaborating with those entities to ensure that we have the right plan in place.
Thank you. And then you're helping with the local communities as well. So
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. In terms of, you said we must steward tax dollars wisely, and I appreciate that. We've had a number of fairly significant fires in Wyoming last year. The House Straw Fire, Johnson County, 175,000 acres. The Elk Fire, 98,000 acres. Rural communities in the West are bracing again for this year, and of course, resources are spread thin. Federal and state agencies, I believe, must work together. So can you talk about how the Forest Service is engaging state, local, and private partners to ensure we can effectively respond to wildfires?
Yes, sir. Senator, so first of all, the National Association of State Foresters represents those state interests in many cases. We've had ongoing dialogue throughout the year with them, and going into the fire season, we increased that dialogue. We've had preseason meetings with all of our cooperators, both at the local government level, the volunteers, and the state. So those meetings have been accomplished. The big thing, though, this year, operating agreements are already all in place for all the states so that when issues come up in terms of who is going to pay the cost of fighting the fire, those questions are not going to be in front of us. That's all been agreed to already. So in terms of that will not impact any tactics or strategies in fighting fire with some concern of who's going to pay for those fires. So those are things that we've done pre-season to ensure that we are prepared and working with our partners.
In this committee over the years, we talk about how many millions of acres of our national forests are at high or very high risk of wildfire. I think it's about 63 million acres right now. In fiscal year 2024, the U.S. Forest Service treated only about 4 million acres of our national forests. I think it's imperative that the U.S. Forest Service start planning on how they're going to treat all these high-risk areas within our national forest system. You inherited the prior administration's budget deficit as well. Can you talk about how you plan to lead the agency to catch up from the last 4 years in forest management?
Yes, sir. Thanks for that question. So I think the big thing is relying on partners. If you recall, there was a disaster bill passed at the end of the year last year. There was about $75 million that Sierra Pacific is putting that money to use on federal lands to create fuel breaks. So we're going to be looking at other partnerships, whether that's with NGOs, whether it's directly with industry, but helping us to manage the national forest system to increase the pace and scale of what we're doing. So that's a big part of our strategy. It's also going to be relying on states to do that.
And my final question, Mr. Chairman, thanks so much for your indulgence. Just last week, the U.S. Department of Agriculture announced it'll be revising the NEPA regulations, the National Environmental Policy Act. So I commend you and Secretary Rollins for your efforts to reduce unnecessary red tape and to streamline the projects. As you're well aware, the Forest Service is required to update and develop land management plans to guide management of our national forests. I understand the U.S. Forest Service has been conducting public and stakeholder meetings, so Wyoming's voice will be heard. Currently, Wyoming, the Bridger-Teton National Forest, and the Black Hills National Forest are undergoing their forest plan revision process. Can you please give us an update on your timelines for these forest plans?
Yes, sir. Thanks for the question. So the Black Hills Plan was started in 2001. The Phase 1 assessment is complete, and we expect to have the full plan completed in 2027. So there's ongoing public involvement there. On the Bridger-Teton Plan, that was started in 2024. The draft assessment is out currently today for public review. That public review will end in August of 25, and we expect that entire process should take 2 to 3 years to complete that process.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, Senator Barrasso. Senator Wyden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schultz, the lack of emergency preparedness, whether it's in Texas Hill Country or public lands in Oregon, can cost lives. Just recently, fire officials in Southern Oregon told me they were coming up dangerously short in emergency preparedness. Specifically, I was told in Southern Oregon, one meteorologist is trying to provide early warning systems and doing the work for 4 people. Now, what this, of course, is all about is getting key, timely information out to communities so they can battle these infernos. We've talked in the past about these infernos are not your grandfather's fires. They're bigger and they're hotter, and we need to address this critical preparedness gap. Now, instead of moving quickly, you all have trotted out yet another new and described as improved reorganization in the middle of a very dangerous fire season. Now, nobody in my home state, and I was chair of this committee and worked closely with the agency, has in effect said, Ron, we got to have the Forest Service less involved in fighting fires. But that is the net effect of your organizational plan. So here's my question. What is this new plan going to accomplish for preparedness in my home state this fire season? That's what I was asked about. What can be done this fire season, and how is this new organizational plan going to get real help to people quickly?
Senator Wyden, thank you for the question. So this fire season, we do not intend to implement any changes in the structure of the fire program. Nothing is going to take place this fire season.
So why aren't we using the resources that seem to be going to this new plan to get help to the people who are telling me they're coming up short? Why wouldn't we get that help out to them quickly?
So just in terms of resources this year, so here's where we're at today. So our max staffing that we typically hire for firefighters, GS9 and below, is 11,300 firefighters. Today, we're at 11,250 roughly firefighters. So we are at about 99% of our hiring resources. So in terms of firefighting capacity, we're there. So we've not made any changes to our resource availability this year, whether it's aviation resources or...
Why don't you get me in writing something that backs up your argument that there's been no reduction in resources? Because that's not what I was just told in Southern Oregon, where they're worried about getting urgently needed information. Now, along these lines, we've been told that the agency, and we're most of the way through the fiscal year, hasn't even treated half as many acres to reduce wildfire risk as were treated in the last year of the Biden administration. Why is that?
So, sir, we actually have treated similar acres that we've done in previous years. And so this administration came in February. So in terms of basically treating acres, there's not been a major reduction in acres treated for the last year, for this year. So
we will get to you those numbers because that is factually inaccurate.
Okay.
And let me tell you what concerns me about this net effect, because I've described to you the problems that we're seeing on the ground in Southern Oregon, where we're not getting the help in terms of stepping up to deal with emergencies. I mentioned the data that shows we're not doing as much timber production in line with natural resources laws as in the Biden administration. And it seems to me what y'all are doing is making a case that somehow this mismanagement is a case for selling off our public lands. And I want you to know that I am going to fight that argument every step of the way, because we heard loud and clear that when the administration advanced their arguments just recently for selling off public lands, the American people said, no way. Not a close call, no way. And I'm not going to allow the mismanagement and the lack of really using resources effectively, as I've just described in my state, become an argument that somehow this mismanagement is a case for selling off our public lands. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Wyden. Chief Schultz, I was thrilled by the announcement made by Secretary Rollins about the rescission of the 2001 Roadless Rule. The Roadless Rule prohibits, as the name implies, road construction, and it also prohibits effectively timber harvesting on nearly 59 million acres of National Forest System lands, including 60% of the Forest Service land in Utah. By the way, that 59 million acres represents nearly 10% of the total federal land footprint. This is a significant amount of land. Now, while the intent of the original Roadless Rule may well have been to preserve the environment, in practical effect, in many ways, it's done the opposite of that. The practical effect of it has been environmental disaster. It's been devastating to forest health and to wildfire mitigation efforts. It's also added to the demise of our domestic timber industry. Last year, I asked your predecessor, a person who held this job in the previous administration, if the Roadless Rule had helped or hindered wildfire mitigation efforts. And he said, quote, "I don't think it was designed to help wildfire mitigation." Certainly a true statement, and vastly understated in my opinion. Now, would you say that the Roadless Rule has helped or hindered wildfire mitigation efforts over the last 2 decades?
Senator Lee, I would say the Roadless Rule, and what we see in terms of the data sets, there's about 24.5 million acres of roadless areas that are within the wildland-urban interface or within 1 mile of the wildland-urban interface. So by not being able to have areas that we can go into and manage or be able to put the fires out, that is a problem. So it doesn't help for sure, and it definitely hinders. And what you'll find out too is that many roadless areas are in fact roaded. So sometimes it's a misnomer. I was in Montana last week on the Helena, Lewis, and Clark Forest. There's a lot of roaded, roadless, same thing on the Lolo Forest. So to suggest that roadless areas are truly always roadless, that is not the case. In many cases, historically, we're roaded.
No, I get that, but that's not the point. The point is just whether it's helped or hindered.
It's not helped.
Good. Now, so what does the rescission of the Roadless Rule mean then for land management, for timber harvesting, and for wildfire mitigation on Forest Service land going forward? What does that look like?
Chairman, so the rescission, what that will look like is we will begin this fall, we will have a rulemaking process that we will go through that process to repeal the rule officially. There are 2 states that we will not be repealing the rule. That's Idaho and Colorado that have their own unique roadless rules, so those rules will not be impacted. But we will repeal the rule through a rulemaking process. We'll have public input in that process. And then ultimately, we would have to amend forest plans to adopt that strategy in those forest plans. But that's what we started this fall.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to discuss briefly the revisions to the Manti-LaSalle National Forest Management Plan. The 2023 draft of that plan included 122,780 acres of recommended wilderness areas. Now, to be perfectly clear, these areas do not meet the Forest Service's own standards for wilderness or for recommended wilderness. The recommendations also appear to conflict with the Utah Wilderness Act of 1984, which designated wilderness areas in exchange for the assurance of no future Utah wilderness designations. That agreement was seemingly ignored by the Biden administration. Will you commit to working with the state and with local cooperating agencies to reevaluate and remove these recommended wilderness areas before the final land management plan is complete?
So, sir, yes, we have received those comments from the state. They're being reviewed right now. We will definitely be working with the state in that review of that process and reconsidering those recommendations in the draft.
Thank you, and I hope you'll reach out to me as you do that in any way I can be helpful. I'd love to be kept apprised of that. Now, timber harvesting is a critical component of responsible forest management. It helps maintain healthy forest density, removes hazardous fuels by preventing fuel buildup for the fires, and supports rural economies across the country. And since 2000, just in the last 25 years alone, the average annual harvest from forest system lands has been just 2.3 billion board feet, far below both historic averages and allowable quantities. Now, just last week, we took a huge step in the right direction by enacting new timber harvesting provisions in the big, beautiful bill passed by Congress and signed into law by President Trump to help restore our forests and revitalize the domestic timber industry. What do you see as the biggest remaining barriers to increasing timber production on federal lands, now that this bill has been passed? And how do we cut through red tape and provide a degree of certainty for our timber and our sawmill industries?
Mr. Chairman, I think you hit a lot of the good points. The biggest thing that the sawmills are looking for is certainty and predictability, right? So the biggest thing is the Forest Service needs to do what they say they're going to do. So when you talk about, our sustainable supply and what we're doing, if we deliver what we're saying we're going to do, that's what the industry is looking for. In terms of barriers that are out there, we know litigations are barriers. But in terms of funding things, we're looking at other ways. You'd mentioned the long-term contracts that are identified in the reconciliation bill. That's something we will be looking at. We actually just signed an agreement with the state of Montana just last week to do a 20-year agreement where the state would come in and assist in managing federal lands. And that's something that we actually have some initial discussions with Utah to look at that and other states in the West as well. So we see that being an opportunity where the states can kind of step in and help us in managing those resources on a go-forward basis. So that's it. I mean, we're looking at other mechanisms for contracting. We're looking at working with partners on a go-forward basis. Litigation is something, and I know there are provisions and other statutes and laws you all are looking at right now to help with some of that. We've talked about the Cottonwood decision many times, but that is one that is out there that still creates some hurdles for us, the litigation piece.
Thank you very much. Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Schultz, welcome. As you know, the Forest Service plays a critical role in wildfire response, not just programs to prevent or mitigate the impact of fires, but to respond to them when they happen. However, under the current administration, we've seen a dangerous reduction in the capabilities and capacity of the Forest Service to respond to wildfires through both the Deferred Resignation Program and the Voluntary Early Retirement Authority. The Forest Service has lost more than 5,000 employees, about 1,400 of whom had red cards, and you know the significance of red cards. So I'm concerned that this represents a significant reduction in capability and capacity and poses a serious danger to communities, not just in California, elsewhere in the West and across the country. These staffing reductions, coupled with the president diverting National Guard units in California to mean that those resources are no longer available to support our wildfire response capacity. It's not just irresponsible, it's dangerous. That's me talking. I want to hear from you. Chief, I know that since the reductions, the agency has invited those who resigned to restatus themselves for fire season. Can you share with the committee how many have actually taken the agency up on the offer to restatus?
Senator, thank you for the question. So just to kind of restate again, in terms of resources, we're basically at 99% of capacity of our firefighting resources in terms of our GS9 and below firefighters. So we have had no degradation.
Is that funding or staffing levels?
It's staffing levels, yes, sir. And there's been no impact on the funding either on that.
So how have you offset the more than 1,500 staff?
Okay, so we're talking two different things. So we had people that took DRP. The DRP was, firefighters were not eligible for DRP. We had non-firefighting personnel that had red cards, like you said, that were about 1,400 that did.
So you're saying
take
there's no
DRP.
reduction in the red cards?
No, what I'm saying is that the firefighters that are classified as firefighters were not eligible for DRP, so none of them took DRP. We had other staff that were non-fire personnel that do have red cards. And we had, like you mentioned, we had about, I think we had 4,000 took DRP and another 1,000 that retired outside of DRP. And there was about 1,400 that did have red cards. So those are the folks that you're referring to. We don't have numbers yet. They've just been kind of coming back on in the last couple of weeks. And as we get those numbers, we can get them to you. But we have reached out, as you indicated, to those 1,400 and allowed for them to come back. And not just allow, but encourage them to come back. We have a process for them to come back and support us this year through the end of September.
Yeah, well, I'm going to eagerly await those numbers and regular reports and updates because red cards are significant. Even those that are not firefighters serving critical roles that support the firefighting activity. So I'm going to be looking for that data and those further assurances and commitment on your part because we're just now entering peak fire season in California and throughout the West. I want to get back to the topic of partnerships. You've mentioned it earlier in the hearing. I know Senator Barrasso emphasized this earlier in the hearing. The Forest Service's state and private forestry programs, including state fire assistance, the volunteer fire assistance, and the broader state, private, and tribal forestry initiatives provide crucial financial and technical support to state and local fire departments for wildfire prevention, as well as detection and suppression. These programs are essential for building and maximizing the capacity in fire-adapted communities and ensuring the safety of first responders during wildfires. What is the status of FY25 funding for these programs? Are you aware? And I guess alongside with that, what's your confidence level in getting the funding out by the August 15th deadline?
Sure. Thank you, sir. So, Senator, the fiscal year 25, we're still working with OMB on that request. So we're looking to finalize that here probably within the next couple of weeks.
Look, that worries me. I don't mean to cut you off.
Yes.
The deadline to get this out is August 15th. We're a month out, and you're still finalizing the numbers?
So Q4 numbers for 25 are still being finalized for some of those programs. Yes, sir.
That should be a big red flag for all of us. Let me make one other important point as my time is running out. From past fires in California, including Santa Rosa, years ago, Los Angeles more recently, these are the types of programs that we should be supporting. I asked you about the FY25 numbers. Do you know what the FY26 numbers? My understanding is the president's proposed budget zeroes out this program. How does that make any sense?
So, Senator, I think what the intent of that program in 26 is to transfer that responsibility to the states. That's the intent of that, and that giving the states some heads up that that's coming.
Look, as every state that I'm aware of is having a tougher budget picture to face. The threat of fires is real. The threat of fires is growing. How does it make sense for the federal government to zero out these programs that you said are so critical?
Sir, we would still be partnering with the states in dialogue and discussions, but the transfer.
But you're zeroing out the resources. How does that make any sense?
That's correct. Well, it's sharing that responsibility and pushing that to the states.
You're pushing it to the states that have less resources to work with. How does that make any sense?
In a sense, it makes sense because it's putting that responsibility on the states to make those decisions locally.
Look, it may be residents of California or Utah or other states in between. These are all Americans. Communities in the United States of America that are at increased risk because of the actions of this administration, which contradict the supposed goals and objectives. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Daines.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. If I might just comment on the state's role, and thank you, Chief Schultz, for being here. If you take a look at the landscapes across Montana and look at federal lands versus state lands, I can tell you the state's doing a much, much better job in terms of stewardship of public lands than the federal government. And I appreciate the efforts you're doing to work with the states as you are doing. I know the Idaho delegation Chief Schultz likes to claim you, but I want to remind the committee here that before you were in Idaho, you were a Montanan, and it was good to see you here. You understand the West, and I appreciate that. I want to acknowledge the work the Forest Service firefighters are doing currently across the country. This fire season is expected to be another challenging year for you and your team. Congress must do more to ensure the Forest Service has the tools needed to not only fight the fires, but to prevent them in the first place. And we can do this by increasing better forest management activities, decreasing litigation that's holding up projects. Chief Schultz, on the 4th of July, President Trump signed into law the One Big Beautiful Bill, and with it is an extremely important provision for forest health. As you know, the new law requires the Forest Service to nearly double annual timber sales by 2034. That would put Montana at approximately 250 million board feet and about 5 billion board feet nationally. These numbers are more in line with our forest plans and will lead to stronger rural communities, better forest health, and reduced wildfire risk. Chief Schultz, will you prioritize the implementation of this provision in the One Big Beautiful Bill?
Senator, thanks for the question. Yes, we will be doing that. We know that those provisions are there. I think the increase is 250 million board feet nationally, year over year, for the next 10 years, and we will be doing that. Yes, sir.
Thank you. You brought up the Cottonwood decision in one of your responses. I have the bill that will fix that disastrous Ninth Circuit Cottonwood decision. It's crucial in preventing some of the litigation that is stopping wildfire mitigation work, and fixing it will be necessary for you to fully implement the new provisions that are found in the Big Beautiful Bill. In Montana alone, there are 367 million board feet of timber projects tied up in litigation. This means less work done on the ground before fire season starts in Montana, an increased risk of catastrophic wildfires for our communities. And by the way, many think about Montana as being, their beautiful rivers, our fishing, which we're all a part of. We are a semi-arid state. Think about this city here, Washington, D.C. gets 39 inches of rain, more than Seattle gets, by the way, by a little bit. My hometown of Bozeman, 16 inches of rain. So it's a precious commodity water is. It's also why we've got to be smarter and better in managing our forests because of the semi-arid climate of which I get to call home, which I'm very thankful for. Their increased costs is the Forest Service must spend additional staff time responding to litigation and time trying to make these projects bulletproof rather than advancing other work. In fact, during a recent hearing, Associate Chief Chris French said the Forest Service unit costs are double in regions with frequent anti-forestry litigation. Chief Schultz, will you commit to working with me and this committee to get a legislative fix done so that the Forest Service can focus on getting fire mitigations completed rather than fighting endless litigation?
Senator Daines, yes, we will do that.
And incidentally, on that Ninth Circuit Cottonwood fix, this started off as a small band here of advocates wanting to address that issue. It's moved now to being very bipartisan. In fact, it came through unanimous consent in this committee last time we had it before in a markup. So I'm hoping we can get this done. Both sides of the aisle recognize the importance of fixing that Ninth Circuit decision and making the Ninth congruent with the rest of the nation. Third, I want to talk about emergency action determinations. In April, Secretary Rollins expanded the authorization for the Forest Service to use the emergency action authority that I authored. This authority reduces red tape, allows the Forest Service to expedite needed active forest management and prevent these catastrophic wildfires. No one can deny that our forests are in a crisis with beetle kill, drought, overgrowth that are destroying the health of our forests. Chief Schultz, can you speak to the groundwork the Forest Service has been able to do with this expanded emergency authority?
Senator Daines, yes, thanks for the question. So yeah, that authority expanded that. Previously, it was about 20 to 30 million acres have been identified. Now we're looking at 112 million acres across the country that are at risk of catastrophic fire or insect and disease. So those authorities help us to get work done quicker on the ground. We're using that today in Region 1, in Region 6, and in Region 5. So those authorities are already moving forward, as you alluded to.
Great. Thank you, Chief.
Yes, sir.
Senator Heinrich.
Chief, you've talked recently about how your budget is constrained because you need to pay out accrued vacation time for the 5,000 Forest Service employees who opted into the deferred resignation program. Basically, 5,000 people that were paying not to do work in our forests. Which programs are being affected this year because of the need to pay out that leave?
So Senator Heinrich, we're using primarily IRA and IIJ funds to pay those out. Those are the funds that are being used for that.
So it had no impact on the decision to zero out the state and volunteer fire assistance program?
Sir, no, those funds were not used directly. They were not directly earmarked for SFA and VFA funding. Those were not those funds.
You told the Senate Appropriations Committee a few weeks ago that the Forest Service would be quickly releasing the FY25 funds for these programs for state and volunteer fire assistance, but now we're hearing that states have been told to prepare to receive zero funding this year. Is that correct?
Sir, you're correct in what my testimony was, and what we're telling states right now is we don't have an answer just yet, but we're not telling them they're not going to get it. We're saying we're still in discussion on that. So we're not saying they're not going to get it, but we're still in discussion.
Well, what I would say is that states need that funding. That is a example of a successful partnership. If we don't have that funding, that's not shared responsibility. That's abdicating our federal responsibility. And not every state has even an agency in place to sort of replace that capacity at the state level at a time when their budgets are also being decimated by Medicaid cuts, thanks to the big whatever bill. So I would think very seriously about our responsibility to continue to maintain positive relationships with those states and meet our federal responsibility. You have any thoughts?
So what I can tell you is your sentiments have been reflected by the state foresters, and we're in close communication with them, and we're aware of their concerns, and we're taking those into consideration as we work through this issue. Yes, sir.
Last year, the Forest Service predicted it would accomplish about 4 million acres of hazardous fuels reduction in 2025. You're 3/4 of the way through the fiscal year. What's your number right now?
Sir, I don't have that number with, but I'll get it to you.
I think I have the number, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. It's about 1.7 million acres. So not even 50% of the way towards our goal, despite the fact that we're almost through the fiscal year. So one of the things we agree on in this committee is we'd like to see more fuels reduction as a way to deal with our fire risk. And yet we are abysmally behind our goals. We have 5,000 fewer people working for the Forest Service now, and there are many of us on this committee that are worried that the current budget is a recipe for more trees burned and fewer trees cut. What would you say to my constituents who are worried that this budget blueprint is going to result in fewer hazardous fuels being treated?
Senator Heinrich, what I would say is that overall, we're still going to maintain our fuels program as we have done it. This budget, what it does, though, is it transfers the fuels program to Department of Interior. So that work would be done in the future by Department of Interior. That's part of what happens in this budget. That fuels program goes there. So we would be working with Department of Interior to accomplish those objectives on Forest Service ground. So the intent, we still have the same amount of funding. The funding doesn't shift for fuels. It just shifts from Forest Service to Department of Interior. So the intent would still be to accomplish those goals.
So as the firefighting efforts are shifted to Interior, would the hazardous fuels treatments go with them?
Senator Heinrich, yes, sir. So the funding for that program, the $170 million, does transfer to Interior, so the large bulk of that would transfer with that program. Yes, sir.
When are we going to get a detailed blueprint of what this new firefighting approach is going to look like?
So, Senator, we have been requested through the executive order within the next 90 days to develop a plan that would identify the structure of this. So that's something that we've just started discussions internally and with Department of Interior. So we will meet the timelines that are established in the executive order. So as we work through that, in 90 days, we'll have a plan of what this would look like.
irrespective of how long it takes to put that plan together, I think there are many of us who are more concerned about the adequacy of that plan and would like to see that plan before we start making budgetary decisions about whether it's a good idea or not. I am very open to different ways of organizing how we fight fires on our national forests and our public lands. But I want to see the plan because people's lives and livelihoods are at stake. We have to get that right. And irrespective of whether the White House wants it in 2 weeks or 90 days, I know that members of this committee are going to want to see the details and know that this has actually been thought through, unlike some of the early decisions about letting people go who are critical to the management of our public lands.
Senator Risch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tom, good to see you. Tom and I share a lot. My undergraduate was in forestry. Are you first? I'm very sorry. The chairman called on me. This doesn't happen in my committee.
I'm so sorry. I've even got it on my card. Senator Cassidy.
Oh, I'm glad.
Sorry, Bill.
Sorry.
When I speak to my sheriffs back home, next to Kisatchie National Forest, they are providing law enforcement within the forest. And there'll be people that will go for recreation, and somebody gets drunk and causes a problem. And it's they who are providing the services. They're not really getting compensated for that. So Grant Parish, for example, the majority of which is owned by the federal government through the Kisatchie, is providing that sort of service. I'm told that the agents that are there are merely there to make sure that somebody is not harvesting a tree which they shouldn't harvest, dig something out of the ground and take it away. But if there's a fist fight, they don't go and break it up. But my sheriffs are not being compensated. So, and I'm sure this is true elsewhere, I'm sure it's true as elsewhere. Is there anything in the budget that will help defray the expense of law enforcement being effectively outsourced to the local community?
Senator Cassidy, thank you for the question. So we have approximately 300 law enforcement officers around the country.
Now, I'm told that they don't break up fights. I'm told that they keep people from illegally harvesting, like digging up a plant and taking it away.
So I don't think that's wholly accurate. So we do, our law enforcement officers and investigators, they do deal with trespass timber issues. They deal with fire starts in terms of investigations, but they also address law enforcement issues in the forest.
But if you have 300 with as much land as you have, that's not very many. To stretch more than thin.
Sir, you're right. They are stretched thin, but they do cooperate, as you mentioned, with local law enforcement. And we have different agreements. So every law enforcement, it could be at a county level, it could be at a local level. We do have reciprocity agreements where there is assistance provided and requested in some cases. And there are some instances where there are charges that we don't typically assess. You're talking about some of those criminal charges. Those would be assessed typically by local law enforcement.
But they're also having to incur the expense, and these are rural parishes or counties, and they're incurring the expense of actually providing these services. So what's being done to compensate? Right now, nothing's being done to compensate.
Right.
Yeah, so how do we address that?
So I think it's something we need to follow up with you on. We'll take that offline, and we'll talk with our law enforcement folks and talk about what a strategy might look like to do that.
I'd appreciate that because these are rural parishes,
Yes, sir.
poorly resourced, and particularly if 80% of the parish or county is absorbed by the forest, their tax base, and PELT doesn't really work for them, their tax base is not adequate to support. So major issue. So if we could follow up on that, that would be great.
Sir.
There's also logging activities that take place. In Kisatchie, they do logging there. Some of my small contractors feel like they get elbowed out by the big guys. And so these are family-owned businesses, important for that rural parish's economic vitality. The big guys are based someplace else. They come in and they leave. Is there any kind of understanding of the need to maintain a local economy in a county or parish in which the federal government owns most of the land? And if so, does it include, and how does it include making sure that you can contract with some of the smaller businesses?
So Senator, thanks for the question. We do have a couple programs. One, we have small business administration programs. So if you have less than 500 employees, there are specific provisions in our timber sales that we have to afford so many timber sales to small business. And those are bid out. You have
Now,
to,
that's a sale. Does that include the logging itself?
the logging, you can actually be a logging contract and directly buy a timber sale. It doesn't,
it.
you don't have to be a mill to buy a timber sales. So that they would qualify as a small business. The other opportunity we have is we have provisions that allow us to direct sales to small companies or to just logging contractors at less than $10,000. There's provisions in some of the legislation being considered in FOFA that would change that and adjust that for inflation. So there's the ability to increase direct sales to small operators on small volumes and small values that they could buy those directly. And so there's a couple programs that we do have that would give some of those smaller operators a greater advantage in terms of buying some of that wood.
So if some of my folks end up not being aware of this, then I may connect back with you to make sure that they are.
Yes, sir.
I'm almost out of time, and I'll yield. Thank you.
Senator Cantwell.
Mr. Chairman, first I want to thank you, Chief Schultz, for being here, and I want to take a moment with my colleague from Idaho to acknowledge the sacrifice and bravery of the firefighters in the Coeur d'Alene, Idaho area. And my condolences go out to their families and to this community. And so we want to remember these individuals and again, thank the firefighters all across the nation. Chief Schultz, the season is upon us. I think my staff probably has our most recent charts that show how bad our prediction is for this summer. You know, each month it gets more dramatic, and so the challenges that we face is we want to prepare, and I think as the nation sees practically 24/7 coverage of what natural disasters can do to a community, one of the best things that you can do is cache resources early. And that cache, meaning C-A-C-H-E, cache them early so that they're close to the proximity of where they need to be. And that's always the best thing to do. And I do think, you know, people are probably asking questions why, if you thought you were going to have flood season in Texas, why didn't you have more resources there at an earlier time? But now we know this is the outlook for us. My colleague and I think our whole states will be covered in red. I don't know about you, but as I fly home every week, I see less and less snow on the Cascades, and I keep thinking, wow, this is really a challenge because you're just going to have drier and drier conditions. Okay, so where is the resource for the state? I think it's, you know, a budget that's already been approved. So why aren't we releasing the funds that go to the community so that they can best prepare for this fire season?
Senator Campbell, thanks for the question. I think you're talking about the SFA and the VFA funding. We were talking about that previously. So we are evaluating that right now. We've had a lot of feedback from the state foresters. We're working with OMB on that question right now, looking at that issue. So we have not made a determination yet, but that's something that is being evaluated.
So when do you expect that to go out?
So we expect there probably to be determination in the next several weeks would be my expectation.
Okay.
But we don't, again, we can't commit that that's for sure going to go out yet. That's still under discussion.
Well, we want to follow the normal process so that the Forest Service is working, you know, with others to get the resources into those communities and do the work that they need to do. Same question about LWCF. Why is that money being held up by OMB or others?
So, Senator Cantwell, what we're looking at is just looking at the administration's priorities and looking at the 25 budget to make sure the work that we're doing is in alignment with the priorities of the administration. So that's something that's just being evaluated right now, and we're still looking at that.
But if LWCF are projects submitted and approved by Congress, this committee played a key role in saying we want to fund these and let's move forward. Why is OMB now requiring, you know, a review of LWCF projects?
Senator, I think it's just like I mentioned, we're looking at all those programs in the 25 budget, just looking at alignment with the priorities of the administration.
What does that mean? That you're creating a different process than exists, that has been practiced for 50 or 60 years?
I don't think it's that we're creating a new process. I think what we're saying is that just given the authorities in the CR, so I think the language looking is that, so we're saying the president is acting within his authority for the full year continuing appropriations to revise spending within the amounts provided by Congress. I mean, I think that's what's being done. We're looking at that right now.
Okay, and then on the roadless rule, you know, I love my colleague from Idaho. He probably doesn't want me to say that. Okay, I'll pretend I don't like you. How about that? I don't like you. But he did implement a roadless rule in his state, which he got the people together and he got it done. He made the right decisions. So, or he made a lot of decisions, okay? He made a lot of decisions. So that's the prerogative. Like, that was the way it worked. Like, a state could step up and do the work, or you could have somebody else tell you. In this case, he did the work. So are you aware that research found that approximately 88% of all wildfires are human-caused, and 95% of those fires are ignited within a half a mile of a road? And so one of the reasons why the roadless rule was good for some of these areas is because, no, we're not having roads all over the place, and we're not igniting fires all over the place. So do you have an assessment of the cost of rescinding the roadless rule when you might be building roads into pristine areas and causing more challenges?
So, Senator, I think our bigger concern isn't building roads into pristine areas. It's that we've got 24.5 million acres of the roughly 60 million acres of roadless that is within either in the WUI or it's within a mile of the WUI. So that is our primary concern on this, is that we've got areas, and I mentioned this earlier in my testimony, that there is much roadless area that actually has roads in it. I was on the Helena, Lewis and Clark Forest last week. The Lolo Forest has roads. It's not uncommon that roadless areas do have roads. It just inhibits.
No, the question is whether we want to continue that process. And I think what everybody wants is to not, we want to maintain our forests. We want to have recreational areas. We want to invest in the resources to have the public go enjoy those recreational areas. I personally don't want to sell public lands. So, but at the same time, you're saying, let's not build more roads in places we don't need to build more roads just because one or two people have a great idea that's what they want to go do. Let's set aside those areas that we think, no, really, we shouldn't be building roads there. That was the whole point of the roadless rule, is to make those decisions. And as I said, my colleague was successful at making those decisions and prioritizing that. And so now, if you're saying the wildland-urban interface is really an issue, yeah, I agree. The wildland-urban interface should be debated every day of the week now, because what we're finding is that we almost had literally a fire approach Spokane. I mean, there are people who are looking at and saying, not where the next, fire like the Palisades or like Hawaii, but people are saying the next event is going to be something that goes all the way from the WUI to a major urban city and could cause that much damage, and that's what happened outside of Spokane last summer. So I think we're all in, but I think you and I will probably have to continue this dialogue about what's best to do to approach this issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Risch.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to my friend from Washington. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that that horrible situation we had with the firefighters being killed up. Firefighting is a really dangerous job to begin with. Then when you add to it this kind of thing, it's awful. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you to Washington, which responded with literally hundreds of law enforcement people to address this situation. We're very thankful for that. Our heart goes out to the people up there. Tom, proud of you. You're the first Idahoan to be chief since Dale Bosworth was when I was governor of Idaho. Dale and I had graduated in the same class from the University of Idaho College of Forestry. That was a little before your time, probably, but Dale did a great job and helped me. And my colleague got ahead of me on the roadless. She knew I would be bringing it up, and that was really an effort between us in Idaho. And how this worked is George W. Bush invited the states to look at the roadless areas and come up with a plan for their state. We were, I guess Colorado did some, but we were primarily, we've got the the other states did not do what we want to do. And frankly, I had a lot of people advise me that I shouldn't get into that because it was controversial. As you know, nobody knows how many roadless lawsuits there's been. There's been hundreds, maybe into the thousands. And every time the Republicans are in, the Democrats file suit, and every time the Democrats are in, the Republicans file suit, and nothing ever gets done. The good news, and I think the proof is in the pudding on my roadless rule, is that since that's been in for the last 2 decades, we haven't had one lawsuit involving roadless in Idaho. There have been a lot of roadless lawsuits, but every time they're filed, they exclude Idaho from the suit. So, I mean, I think that's, the lawsuits, it's a great deal for the lawyers, but it really wastes a lot of time and energy and everything else. The way I went about it was, when the federal government suggested that we in the states have a look at it, they gave us no parameters of any kind. And the way I went about it was, I said, well, we're going to put together a committee that has, that everybody's represented at. It's the loggers, it's the, so industry is represented, it was the recreational users, which is not one bucket, as you know. The motorized recreational users are very different from the wilderness-type recreational users. We brought all those people to the table and really took the millions of acres that we had in Idaho and broke them into various, we had 5 different categories because, as you know, the roadless is, as you say, there's roadless that have roads in them, and they're all over the board. And they were the ones left over when they put all the wilderness groups, or all the wilderness lands into wilderness area. There were ones they couldn't reach an agreement on, and they set them aside saying these should be looked at. Well, nobody ever looked at them. But in any event, my pitch to you is that we are in the process of, and have been for a little while, because it has been so successful, looking at it, putting it in statute as opposed to just by rule, because over the last 2 decades, the Forest Service, not you, but the Forest Service, people in the Forest Service have taken a run at dismantling the Idaho roadless rule. The roadless properties, as you know, are managed by a committee that is appointed by the governor, so it's federal land, but we have very strict parameters on these 5 different themes that are there, and then this group manages it. And within there we have a number of small towns, as you suggested, Senator Cantwell. Interface is a real problem when you're coming to fire. So what the Roadless Committee in Idaho has done, they have focused on these areas and have done treatment plans around these towns so they can stop a fire as it goes through there. Because, as you know, one of these things get going at about 10 o'clock in the morning when the wind comes up. What you need is a pair of tennis shoes, because you got to stay away from the fire and not attack the fire. You can't control it. So on the other hand, if you have treated property, that is ones that have had sensible harvest on them, it's really a good thing. So we're going to look at trying to get this statutory in, because the Forest Service, within the Forest Service, there are some who really hate the fact that the state has a say in managing these grounds. Not for those of us that have a lot of federal lands. This is not uncommon for us. But look, we can deal with this, and it's been a tremendous success. So I'm going to enlist your help in that, Tom, to see if we can get that done. And I've always hoped that other states would take a hold of this. It was a collaborative effort. The minute it was done, we had an environmental, or one of the environmental groups file suit, which I had tried to get to the table. We tried to get everybody to the table, and they filed suit immediately. But bless the environmental group, we said, look, we were going to do this together. We stuck together all the way through the litigation, which went on into the Obama administration. And to their credit, they let us in Idaho direct that lawsuit. It was our roadless rule was approved by the district judge, an environmental leaning district judge in Boise. But more importantly, was approved by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And then certiorari was turned down by the Supreme Court, so we got it. We got our rule, we got it in law, but we'd like to see it statutorily. So we've been working at it for some time, going to continue to do it. It's been a tremendous success. I highly recommend it for any state that doesn't have it. You can avoid all those lawsuits and actually do stuff with the ground that's in keeping with the various themes that we propose. I've talked long enough. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the floor. Thank you, Senator Cantwell, and those of you from states that have large federal holdings. I strongly recommend the approach that we did in Idaho. Tom, thank you for your service. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Senator Hickenlooper, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my colleague from Idaho, I appreciate all your work. I share a lot of that history with you. We worked on our roadless rule. I think it got finally enacted in 2012. I came in and got elected in 2010. So it took a big part of my first couple years to get everybody around that table and make sure that every single hunters and anglers and timber merchants, and you go down the list, everyone signed off on that roadless rule, and it was a remarkable achievement. I don't think it's been, to my knowledge, it's never been litigated since. We moved heaven and earth to make sure that everybody was at the table, because it did help. It doesn't solve the problem, and I mean the problem writ large is that we have a lot of people in this country that want to live in the woods and they want to experience wildlife and be closer to wildlife. And we see more and more people living in that wildland-urban interface. And I'm deeply concerned about our ability to keep them safe. And we're working on our Fix Our Forests Act. It's going to help accelerate the ability to allow thinning of forests, ecological thinning, so that we can make sure that the forests aren't so vulnerable. But the cuts that look like from kind of come through your budget in terms of firefighters, sorry, really concerns me. And we have in our national forest in Colorado, we've got the maroon bells, we've got, well, I go down the list, Fish Creek Falls, a whole bunch of iconic views that people talk about and dream about and come visit. And as every year, we're really worried about it, when a wildfire gets out of control, how do we keep people safe? And it's not just the people that live in the wildland-urban interface, but it's visitors that don't know their way around and are going to get caught up in a place where they're going to have their entire summer disrupted or actually become in danger. So with the budget cuts, I guess my first question is, how are you going to keep Coloradans, but people from all across this country, safe?
So, Senator, thanks for the question. The first response is that the budget, the 26 budget, does not reduce our firefighting resources or capacity. It transfers it from the Forest Service to Department of Interior to create this new Wildland Fire Service. But there is no reduction in the firefighting budget that is established. So there is no reduction in that case. What we have been talking about, though, is there are reductions on some of the state and private components. And that's maybe what you're alluding to, is the SFA, VFA piece. And that's the piece that, as I've testified previously, that would be shifting from the Forest Service paying for those costs or Interior to the states to cover those costs.
Right. And I think what I see again and again throughout all the budgets we're seeing is more costs shifted from the federal government to states and local areas that are going through their own budget struggles right now. I also understand that we need to both streamline our permitting and all of our financial services to look at the wildlife crisis. In what other ways are you promoting resilience in terms of forest fires and those efforts?
So, Senator, I think a big part of what we look at is, the suppression is just the back end of this. Ideally, what we want to do is be very active managers, and that's using prescribed fire, it's using mechanical thinning, it's using commercial timber sales. All of those are critical to making sure that we create resilience and protect communities. One of the big things I mentioned earlier that Congress did back in December is you all passed a disaster supplemental, And there was funding in there for Sierra Pacific to actually do fuel breaks on federal lands, on Forest Service lands in California and Oregon. So to me, those are some of the innovative approaches that we're looking at. We can partner with industry and partner with the states. We just signed an agreement with the state of Montana. We're actually having discussions with the state of Colorado right now, looking at a similar type arrangement where the state could come in and assist in managing some of the federal lands in a broader way. We've also had discussions about even on recreation and how the state can assist in managing recreation. Pikes Peak, for instance, is an area that the state has expressed interest in managing that site. So we are looking very much from a perspective of cooperating with the states to look at how we can address some of these issues.
Appreciate that. Your budget also proposes a land transfer initiative to right-size the federal land. Coloradans, and I can't tell you how many tens of thousands of notices we have, do not want public lands put up for sale, certainly not in any scale. I think we're okay, recognized in certain small areas, isolated circumstances, maybe for workforce housing or something like that in a small mountain community. But I think county commissioners, town councils, mayors, Republicans, Democrats, all called us, wrote us, said, do not sell our public lands at scale, and certainly not to try and reduce the deficit. So hopeful that you'll listen to local governments and public citizens to recognize that that's not a constructive direction to take the Forest Service.
So, Senator, one of the things, I think you alluded to this, there's been a big focus on housing. The administration has looked at this issue and is concerned that as communities want to grow and they're surrounded by federal lands, there's limiting opportunities. So the Forest Service is looking at this issue. We did a 99-year lease on the White River Forest. That is an existing administrative site that is going to be leased for housing. And we're looking at opportunities in Oregon and in Idaho as well. So where we have tracts, we have authority to sell 40 acres right now. It's the Small Tract Act. But we also are looking at other ways to dispose, and those can be long-term leases where we can encourage where communities want to expand ski resorts, for instance, right, where there's not enough housing for employees, where there are current administrative sites. We're not talking about going into the backcountry. We're talking about we have admin sites that are in areas where they're eroded and those kind of things, where you can take those sites and maybe make affordable housing. So that's the opportunities that we're looking at right now.
Okay, well, I'm out of time, but when you use language like right-sizing the federal estate, I think that notion of scale that language creates is of great concern to a lot of people. So just keep that, be mindful. Thank you.
Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief, for being here. Appreciate it. Look forward to working with you. So can I ask, as we're talking about the combination of the U.S. Forest Service firefighting crew along with the Interior and this new bureau and this combination of combining the existing wildland fire programs. That's great. When this happens, what involvement will the U.S. Forest Service still have in this new bureau?
Senator Cortez Masto, so right now, we haven't figured that plan out yet. So right now, the executive order directs us within 90 days to come up with a plan. So in terms of what that's going to look like, we know that the Forest Service, the firefighting capacity of the Forest Service is projected to move to Department of Interior to create this fire service. So the Forest Service would be a component of that. How that exactly is structured, we don't know yet because we haven't come up with that plan yet. But we would still have a role. We would just be within this unified fire service.
So I think that's what we'd all be interested in. We want the specifics, obviously, because of our states and the impact these fires have. So if you would be willing to share that with us when that comes to fruition, that would be very, very helpful.
Yes, ma'am. Right now, we have that 90-day plan that we're working on as we speak.
Thank you. How many Forest Service employees, I'm curious, in Nevada in the Lake Tahoe Basin were let go or left since the beginning of this administration? Do you know?
Senator Cortez, I don't have those numbers. We can get those to you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And then we all have talked about this. We know the Forest Service has long struggled to recruit and retain wildland firefighters. But I'm curious. I was upset to learn that the Trump administration scrapped the Women in Wildfire Boot Camps program because the administration deemed them unnecessary DEI initiatives. Now, these were programs that were offered to women to learn the basics of wildland firefighting over a 2-week course. So please explain to me why, when we need wildland firefighters, we're scrapping programs that provide training to both men and women to be in this fight to help us address these fires that are happening across the West all the time now, longer, hotter seasons, and we need firefighters. Why was that program scrapped?
So Senator Cortez Masto, what we've done is we've looked at all of our contracts, everything that we've got. We've looked at that, the department's looked at those, and our assistants from the doers folks have looked at those as well. So when we're looking at those types of issues, we're looking at, we have training for all firefighters, not just women. So instead of just focusing solely on women, we look at what opportunities for training do we have. We have numerous opportunities to train firefighters, not just focusing on women. So I think that was the thought behind that, is that there's still ample opportunities for all firefighters to be trained without just singling out solely women in that case.
Right, but this wasn't really singling out women. This is providing programs to train firefighters, whether they are women or men, who cares? What if there's a program that just trains men? What's the big deal? As long as we're training wildland firefighters, whether it's a man or a woman, those programs should be supported. We need all hands on deck in the West during these fire seasons, so why pick and choose?
Well, I would agree with you. We need all hands on deck, and I think we're looking at training that provides opportunities for everybody to have all hands on deck. I think that's the response.
All right, well, I disagree, and I think it's just it's a poor use of the administration's discretion. Let me ask you this. The Ruby Mountains in northern Nevada is one of my state's most cherished places. It's loved by hunters, outdoor enthusiasts, recreationist tribes, local community leaders. I can't explain it enough. And for many years, all of us, and it goes back to what you've heard in the West, all of the stakeholders, everybody in my state coming together, I don't care what party you are, it's everybody coming together to protect the Ruby Mountains from spurious oil and gas activity that took place there a few years ago in 2017. This committee previously approved my bill, the Ruby Mountains Protection Act, to permanently prohibit oil and gas development there following a 2019 finding by the Forest Service that no leasing should occur there due to the very low potential to develop oil and gas resources in the area and the substantive public opposition. The Biden administration announced it was initiating a 20-year administrative withdrawal process to protect the Ruby Mountain area from oil and gas leasing. However, this administration, the Trump administration, reversed these protections for the Rubies. And the only formal notification I received of this reversal was by reading a USDA press release. And it stated, the agency also canceled 2 mineral leasing withdrawals on Forest Service land that will help boost production of critical minerals, which I was told pertained to the Ruby Mountains in Nevada and another proposed withdrawal in New Mexico. So let me just be clear. Nevadans don't want drilling in the Ruby Mountains. So I'm curious, what production of critical minerals does the Forest Service expect to develop in the Ruby Mountains?
So Senator Cortez Masto, first of all, on future communications, I will communicate with you directly.
Thank you.
On the issue of what we would expect, so typically what happens with leasing of minerals, the Forest Service isn't out there trying to basically promote a certain activity or not, but it would be made available if someone deemed that there was a resource there that would be available for leasing. And I think that was the intent of this action.
But that's already been done, and that's my point. It seems like everything that's been done in the past, including the speculative leasing that has been denied in the past, is being ignored because it was done under a previous administration. It makes no sense. We're wasting the resources of your men and women that work for you, as well as in the interior, because this administration thinks that they've got to start from scratch when they should be actually looking what has happened in the past and not waste everybody's time. So I'm curious, along with the critical minerals, what does this administration have plans to do to open Ruby Mountains for oil and gas drilling? Because now you're telling me that you're willing to do that as well, even though we've already gone through this process. This is Groundhog's Day. I mean, literally, we're repeating this over again. So what is going on?
Senator Cortez Masto, I think there's nothing going on other than we want to make these lands available to be leased.
But they already were available, and your administration said, no, there is no oil and gas available here. It's low potential, and the community doesn't want it. Why would you start this process over again? Why can't you learn from what was happening in the past? Was there some problem there? Something that we're not aware of? It would help my constituents in Nevada understand why this administration wants to repeat the past.
I think the short answer, Senator, is just that we want to make it available, so if there is an interest, that we can evaluate that. It doesn't mean it would automatically be leased. They have to demonstrate.
I appreciate, Chief, and I'm not going to belabor this. Listen, I appreciate this, and I'm going over my time, and I thank you for the indulgence. I look forward to working with you and talking to you about this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Chief Schultz, thank you for being here today. This has been enlightening and informative, just as your service thus far has been encouraging. And some of these issues that we've discussed, it's just a reminder of the fact that the states and tribes are incredible partners. They're indispensable parties, really, in that they're the ones on the ground, living in communities that depend on these forests, that are right next to them, whose lives are inextricably intertwined with the lands in question. So I want to thank you, Chief, for giving the states more authority, more involvement, and more of an ability to set a course for the proper management of these lands, and particularly in the ways that affect states and localities. I know that Utah is really looking forward to working with you to expand these partnerships, and I know my state is not alone in that. As we wrap up, I'll remind members that members may submit questions for the record until 6 p.m. tonight, and then they'll have until 6 p.m. 1 week from today in order to submit any statements that they want to be included in the record. Anything else? With that, we stand adjourned.